brought to you by Chess and Gaming. This first lesson begins with a starting position from the middle game.
When playing against the Hedgehog, White's objective is to prove that he has attacking chances with considerably more space. And considering the fact that there are critical squares all over the board for both sides. On the other hand, it is Black who owns most of the playable pawn levers. At various moments, White has to be aware of the breaks, pawn to b5, pawn to d5, pawn to e5, while White's pawns on c4 and e4 have to be carefully watched over. In this particular game, however, Black's queen is misplaced on the d file, and White exploits this. Keep in mind that the Hedgehog requires precision on Black's part. The exchange sacrifice on d5. This tactical blow highlights White's initiative to attack. The weakness of the pawn on d5, which is also an isolated pawn. The knight on the side of the board on the rim is being attacked. And White also has a nice grip on the b5 square. The bishop on f1 and the knight on c3 both aim at the b5 square. So White has a nice grip on the light squares. Now the e4 square is available for a post. This position calls for tactics. This is the tactical minefield. Answer a threat with a threat. Black is going to play the pawn to g6. If g6, can you find the move for White? Pause the video. I'll give you a few seconds. That is correct. Knight to b5. White's back rank is covered by the two bishops, and the queen cannot infiltrate White's camp. And White castles. This is the end of variation 1. Now we're going to look at another line, another continuation. The first move was knight to b5. Now we're going to look at another choice that White has, and that is knight takes the pawn on d5. Tactic alert. There is an X-ray along the A8 to H1 diagonal. Here, the move that black will play is a6. If a6, can you find the move for white? Pause the video. Bishop takes d7, and after the recapture, knight takes b6. And now, let's move on to the next chapter. If you're going to play the hedgehog, playing the black side, you're going to have to do some preparation and know where to place your queen. Now, we're going to look at this from black's point of view. This position arose from a Sicilian. This lesson's objective is to get you more familiar with the strategies and tactics associated with this defense. Let me give you the opening moves. Starting with e4, c5, we have a Sicilian. Knight f3, e6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight c6, knight b5, d6, and now we have pawn to c4. Knight f6, knight on 1 to c3, a6, knight a3, bishop e7, bishop e2, castle king side, white castles king side, b6, bishop e3, bishop b7, rook c1, rook e8, queen b3, and knight to d7, covering the b6 square. And after knight d7, rook on f to d1, rook c8, and that is the opening line. I'm going to give you the pros of this line. Number 1. Black's position is extremely compact. He sets up a solid wall of pawns, behind whose protection he can arrange a universal piece placement. Number 2, the defensive resources are overwhelming. I'm going to walk you through this game. White tries to use his space advantage, but in order to combat white, black will have to follow these steps. So black will have to move the queen off the d file with ideas such as queen c7 to b8, and at the same time, black will have to pay close attention to white's queenside formation. I've chosen this line because you're going to see two parts of the hedgehog. One that defends well and the other one that attacks well. As I stated before, white's pawns on e4 and c4 have to be carefully watched over. Notice the weakness of the pawn on e4. The threat here is bishop takes c3. That is why white plays the pawn to f3 to cover the pawn. With this move, black intends to get a grip on the f4 square in order to get the knight closer to the king's side. The threat here is pawn to d5. The queen and the bishop x-rays the pawn on h2. So if d5, then bishop takes h2, check to follow. Therefore, white plays the pawn to h3. Rook to d8, x-rays white's queen on d1. One of white's goals when playing against the hedgehog is to start pushing the a pawn and the b pawn. But because black started attacking and setting up threats, white had to hold back the a and b pawns. And this is consistent with what I said before. If you can stop enemy play or stop your opponent's plans, do not hesitate to do so. Notice that white is double attacking the pawn on b6, and the main feature of the hedgehog is attack and defense. So should the move here be knight back to d7 or play a more aggressive move? This is the aggressive hedgehog. Bishop to f4. If white plays bishop takes b6, threatening the rook, then rook to d7, and black will still capture a rook due to the pin. That is why white chose to exchange bishops on f4. Now what you're going to see is black's knights swarm the king's side. The king steps on the knight on g3. Should black retreat the knight or play a more aggressive move? Pause the video, I'll give you a few seconds. That is correct, pawn to d5. This is when the hedgehog's pawn levers become dangerous. Should white capture the knight on g3? The answer is no. Capturing on d5. But let's take the move back and see what happens if white captures the knight on g3. If white plays king takes knight, then it is a mate in 5 moves. Knight to d3, discover check. This is the only correct move for black here. The knight covers f2 and f4, and the queen controls the b8 to h2 diagonal. Queen to f4 check. And now pawn to g4. Find the move for black. Pause the video. I'll give you a few seconds. That is correct. Knight to e5 with the idea of knight to g6. Check. Checkmate. Now back to the starting position after king to f2, pawn to d5. The hedgehog attacks. And only now does black retreat the knight. Of course, it is white's idea to play the rook to c8. But remember, as I stated before, the hedgehog requires precision on black's part. Notice how black will defend against the threat of rook to c8. Notice how the queen on b6 covers the rook on d8, covers the rook on d6, and also protects the knight on e3, while the queen attacks the knight on e3. That is why the hedgehog defense focuses on airtight variations. Now the queen attacks the knight on f4. After maintaining a playable middle game, the goal now is to get to an endgame. And that is exactly what black does. Queen to d6 check, followed by rook to e7. Now both the queen and the rook will come off the board. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe and share. What do you think about this position, and which side would you want to play, black or white?